The hammer clicked back with a sound like a dry branch snapping in the dead of winter. Silas didn't move. His hand hovered 3 inches above the bone grip of his holstered revolver, his fingers twitching in a rhythmic, nervous pulse. Behind him, the widow Alara clutched the frayed hemp rope tied to the neck of her last cow, her knuckles white and shaking. The nameless cowboy didn't blink. He stood 30 feet away, his shadow long and sharp on the baked earth. He watched the sweat bead on Silas's upper lip, a single drop rolling into the man's mustache. The air between them tasted of alkali and impending lead. "You have 3 seconds to drop that heavy bag of coin and walk toward your horse," the nameless cowboy said, his voice a low, level rasp that didn't carry a hint of anger. "If you touch that iron, you won't see the sun hit the horizon." Silas looked at the heavy leather pouch at his feet, then back at the gray eyes beneath the stained felt brim of the cowboy's hat. The silence stretched, heavy as a coffin lid, until the only sound was the cow's low, mournful lowing. The sun had been a white-hot coin in the sky 3 days earlier when the dust first rose on the edge of the valley. If you find value in these chronicles of the high plains, subscribe to the channel and join us on the trail. Your support keeps these stories alive. The nameless cowboy pulled his bay to a halt at the crest of the ridge. He didn't use the reins with force, a slight shift of his weight was enough to tell the animal to stand. He sat there for a long time, his eyes scanning the basin below. His build was lean, the kind of frame earned by years of hard riding and sparse meals, with broad shoulders that didn't slouch despite the heat. He wore a duster caked in the gray-white dust of the panhandle, the hem frayed and heavy with the grit of 5 different territories. His hat was a low-crowned felt, sweat-stained around the band, casting a permanent shadow over eyes the color of a winter river. A faded scar ran across his left knuckles, a jagged reminder of a cold night in Abilene that he never spoke about. On his right hip sat a Colt's single-action army, its bone grips yellowed like old teeth, held in a holster worn smooth by 1,000 draws. Down in the basin, a small shack sat hunched against the wind. It was a one-room affair, built of sun-bleached timber and hope that had clearly run dry. A small corral stood to the side, containing a single, rib-sprung cow. 2 men were standing near the fence, their horses tethered to a stunted mesquite tree. A woman stood between them and the animal. From this distance, she looked small, but she didn't move like someone who was afraid. She moved like someone who was tired of being afraid. The nameless cowboy watched the way the 2 men shifted their weight. He saw the flash of sunlight on a spur's rowel. He saw the way one man pointed a finger at the cow, then at the woman. He didn't need to hear the words to know the rhythm of the conversation. It was the rhythm of a wolf talking to a wounded doe. He nudged the bay down the slope. He didn't gallop. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply descended, the steady clop-clop of the horse's hooves on the shale providing a metronome for the unfolding drama. As he drew closer, the details sharpened. The woman, Alara, wore a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was a mystery. Her face was lined by more than just age, it was the geography of grief. The cow was a red Hereford, its coat dull, its eyes rolling with the heat. The 2 men were Silas and a hired hand. Silas was dressed in a silk vest that didn't belong in this dust, his belly pushing against the buttons, a sign of a man who ate well while others fasted. The nameless cowboy pulled up 20 feet from the group. He didn't dismount. He rested his hands on the pommel of his saddle, his posture relaxed, almost lazy. The movement of his body was minimal, a perfect economy of motion that suggested he could be still for hours or move like a lightning strike in a second. "Good afternoon," the nameless cowboy said. He didn't raise his voice, but it cut through the heated air. Silas turned, his eyes narrowing. He saw a man with no badge, no fancy clothes, and a horse that looked as tired as its rider. He didn't see a threat. He saw an interruption. "We're in the middle of a business transaction, stranger," Silas said. Move along. The cowboy looked at the cow, then at Alara. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. They weren't pleading. They were hollow. He looked back at Silas. "Looks like a fine animal," the cowboy remarked. "What's the price?" $20, Silas snapped. "And it's already agreed upon." Alara's voice was a thin wire. "It's not agreed," she said. "I told you it's worth 50. It's the last thing I have. Without the cow, I can't pay the taxes on the land. Without the land, I have nowhere to go." Silas laughed, a dry, rattling sound. $50 for a bag of bones? You're lucky I'm offering 20. The drought's taken the meat off her. She might not make it to town. My 20 is an act of charity. The nameless cowboy shifted in his saddle. He looked at the dust on his boots. He looked at the scar on his knuckles. He didn't look at Silas when he spoke. Charity usually doesn't involve a man bringing a hired gun to a widow's gate. The hired hand, a lanky youth with a nervous twitch in his jaw, moved his hand toward his belt. The nameless cowboy didn't reach for his Colt. He simply turned his head and looked at the boy. The boy froze. There was something in that gray gaze that felt like the cold weight of a spade hitting frozen ground. "Leave it be, son," the cowboy said softly. "It's a hot day to die for someone else's $20. Silas bristled, his face turning a dark shade of plum. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "A traveler," the cowboy replied. "I think I'll stay a while. The shade of that porch looks inviting." "You're trespassing," Silas growled. The cowboy looked at Alara. "Am I, ma'am?" Alara looked from the stranger to the men who had been hounding her for months. "No," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. "You're welcome to the water in the well. It's bitter, but it's wet." The nameless cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion. He didn't look back at Silas. He led his horse toward the well. Silas stood there for a long minute, his hands balled into fists, before signaling his hand to mount up. "This isn't over," Silas called out as they turned their horses. "That cow belongs to me by sundown tomorrow. One way or another." The nameless cowboy watched them ride away until the dust they kicked up settled back into the earth. He didn't speak to Alara immediately. He drew a bucket of water from the well, the windlass creaking with a rhythmic groan. He let his horse drink first, then he took a long, slow swallow. The water was indeed bitter, tasting of minerals and deep, dark earth. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and finally looked at the woman. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "They'll come back with more men. Silas owns the bank in town. He wants this valley for the railroad that's coming." The cowboy nodded. He walked over to the corral fence and looked at the cow. He reached out a hand, letting the animal sniff his palm before he rubbed its dusty forehead. "Why sell the last one?" he asked. "Because my husband is in the ground behind the house, and the bank doesn't accept memories as payment," Alara said. She walked over to the fence, her steps heavy. "If I sell the cow for 50, I can clear the back taxes. If I sell for 20, I just delay the end by a month." The cowboy reached into his duster pocket. He pulled out a small, leather-bound pouch. He emptied it into his palm. 6 gold coins and a handful of silver. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. He put the money back. "I don't have 50, he said. "But I have a set of hands that can fix that fence. And I have a gun that says Silas has to be honest." "Why?" Alara asked, her eyes searching his face. The cowboy looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. "Because some things aren't for sale," he said. That night, the nameless cowboy didn't sleep in the house. He sat on the porch, his back against the rough-hewn logs, his duster wrapped around him like a shroud. He spent the hours in silence, a quiet, heavy ritual of preparation. He took his Colt from its holster. He didn't do it with a flourish. He did it with the reverence of a monk handling a holy relic. He pulled a piece of oiled flannel from his kit and began to clean the weapon. He worked in dead silence, the only sound the distant howl of a coyote and the soft slide of metal against cloth. He checked the cylinder. He checked the firing pin. He wiped away a speck of dust that no one else would have seen. He loaded 5 rounds, leaving the hammer down on an empty chamber, a habit born of survival. In the morning, the heat returned with a vengeance. The nameless cowboy spent the first 4 hours of daylight repairing the corral. He didn't use a hammer, he used a heavy stone to drive the fallen posts back into the parched earth. He worked with an absolute economy of movement, his breaths coming slow and deep. He didn't stop for water until the fence was solid. Around noon, Elara came out with a plate of hardtack and a tin cup of coffee. "You should leave," she said. "I saw smoke from the direction of town. Silas is gathering men. He doesn't like being told no." The cowboy took the coffee. He didn't eat the hardtack. He sipped the bitter brew, his eyes never leaving the road that led to the valley floor. "I told you I'd stay," he said. "My word is absolute. Both ways." "What does that mean?" Elara asked. "It means if I say I'm staying, I'm staying. And if I tell a man I'm going to kill him, he'd best believe it." An hour later, the dust appeared again. This time, it wasn't just 2 horses. It was 5. They came on fast, the sound of their approach like a muffled drumbeat against the dry soil. Silas was in the lead, riding a black stallion that looked too expensive for the landscape. Beside him were 4 men, all of them wearing the hard, flat stares of those who sold their morality by the hour. They pulled up in a semicircle, effectively boxing in the porch and the corral. Silas looked down from his horse, a smug grin pulling at his lips. He held a leather pouch in his hand. It jingled with the heavy sound of silver. "I thought about our talk yesterday," Silas said, his voice loud and performative. "I decided to be even more charitable. I've brought $30. That's 10 more than yesterday. It's a fortune for a widow with nothing but a dying cow and a crumbling house." The nameless cowboy didn't move from his spot on the porch. He sat on the top step, his arms resting on his knees. "The price is 50, he said. Silas's grin didn't falter. "See, that's the problem with strangers. They don't understand how things work. My friend here, Miller," he pointed to a man with a scarred cheek and 2 revolvers strapped low, "he thinks 30 is a very fair price. He thinks anyone who says otherwise is a thief." The nameless cowboy stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He let his duster fall open, revealing the bone-handled Colt. He walked down the steps and stood in the dirt, 30 feet from Silas. He looked at each man in turn. He didn't look at their faces. He looked at their hands. He looked at the way they sat in their saddles. He was measuring them, calculating the seconds it would take for each to draw. "You're Silas," he said. "You're a man of business. Business requires trust. You lied yesterday when you said that cow was only worth 20. You're lying today when you say 30 is charity. You have nothing left to give that has any value, because your word is worth less than the dust under my boots." Silas's face darkened. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away with your skin intact. I'll even give you $5 for your trouble. Just get on your horse and ride. Don't look back." The nameless cowboy didn't answer immediately. He let the silence hang. He let the heat build. He let the men get restless. He watched the lanky youth from the day before, the boy's hands were shaking. I have a code, the cowboy said, his voice dropping an octave. I don't take from people who have nothing left. And I don't let others do it either. Miller, the man with the scarred cheek, spat a glob of tobacco juice into the dirt. Codes don't stop bullets, friend. There's 5 of us. 1 of you. You do the math. The math is simple, the cowboy replied. I'll kill you first. Then I'll kill the 2 on your left. That leaves Silas and the boy. The boy will run. Silas, well, Silas isn't a fighting man. He's a talking man. The cowboy took a single step forward. The movement was so deliberate it felt like a physical blow. He looked at Silas. I'm giving you a choice. It's the only one you'll get. Pay the woman $50 in gold. Not silver, not clipped coins. Gold. Then take the cow and go. Or leave the cow, leave the valley, and never come back. Silas laughed, but it was thinner this time. Or what? Or I start shooting, the cowboy said. And I don't stop until the air is clear. One of the men on the end, a squat fellow with a greasy hat, reached for his rifle boot. The nameless cowboy's hand didn't move toward his gun. He simply shifted his weight. Don't, he said. The squat man froze. Silas looked at his men. He saw the hesitation. He saw that they were realizing this wasn't a simple intimidation job. This was a man who lived in the space between the heartbeat and the trigger pull. Silas reached into his vest and pulled out a small, heavy purse. He tossed it at the cowboy's feet. There's 50 in gold, Silas said, his voice trembling with rage. Take it. The cow is mine. The cowboy didn't pick up the bag. He looked at Alara. She walked forward, her face a mask of iron. She picked up the purse, opened it, and counted the coins. She nodded. The cowboy looked back at Silas. Untie the rope, he said to the hired hand. The lanky boy jumped down, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud. He untied the cow from the corral fence. The animal groaned, its heavy head swinging low. The boy led the cow toward Silas's group. Now leave, the cowboy said. Silas turned his stallion. You think you won, he spat. You're just a drifter. You'll be gone in a week. I'll still be here. The land will still be here. I'll get what's mine. The nameless cowboy didn't respond. He watched them ride away, the cow trailing behind them at a slow, agonizing pace. He didn't move until they were out of sight. Alara stood by the fence, the gold coins clutched in her hand. Why did you let him take her? She asked. She was the last thing I had. The cowboy looked at the house. You have the money for the taxes now. You have the land. A cow can be replaced. A life can't. He spent the rest of the afternoon helping Alara board up the broken windows of the shack. He didn't talk much. He worked with a steady, rhythmic pace. When the sun began to set, he went to the well and washed the grime from his face and hands. He moved with a heavy weariness now, the adrenaline of the confrontation having ebbed away, leaving only the weight of his past. As the stars began to poke through the darkening canopy of the sky, the cowboy saddled his bay. Alara came out to the porch. You're leaving. I've done what I came to do, he said. You could stay, she said softly. The ranch needs a man who knows how to hold a fence. And a gun. The cowboy tightened the cinch on his saddle. He didn't look at her. I'm not that man, he said. I'm a man who leaves a trail of brass behind him. You don't want that trail leading to your door. He climbed into the saddle. He looked down at her. Keep the gold in the house. Don't go to town alone. If Silas comes back, tell him you sent word to the territory marshal. It's a lie, but it might buy you time. I don't like lying, Elara said. Then don't, the cowboy said. Just tell him the nameless cowboy is only a day's ride away. That'll be truth enough. He turned his horse toward the road. But he didn't head for the valley exit. He headed toward the town. The town was a collection of rot and commerce huddled together in a canyon. It was called Red Rock, and it smelled of wet wool and wood smoke. The cowboy rode in after midnight. The streets were empty, save for a few stray dogs and the muffled sounds of a piano coming from the Silver Dollar Saloon. He didn't go to the saloon. He went to the livery stable. He found the red Hereford cow in a small, cramped pen at the back of the stable. She was standing in her own filth, her head hanging. There was no water in the trough. The cowboy felt a cold, sharp anger rise in his chest. He didn't draw his gun. He found a bucket, filled it from the stable pump, and let the animal drink. He watched her for a long time, the way her throat worked as she swallowed. He heard the crunch of gravel behind him. I figured you might show up here, a voice said. The cowboy didn't turn around. He knew the voice. It was Miller, the man with the scarred cheek. Silas is upstairs in the hotel, Miller said. He's drinking expensive bourbon and talking about how he's going to hire 10 more men to go back to that ranch tomorrow. He says he's going to burn it down. He says he doesn't care about the cow anymore. He cares about the insult. The cowboy turned slowly. Miller was standing 10 feet away, his hands resting on his belts. He wasn't alone. 2 other men stood in the shadows of the stable doors. He paid the $50, the cowboy said. The transaction was closed. Silas doesn't believe in closed transactions, Miller said. He believes in winning. And he thinks you're a dead man walking. The cowboy looked at the 3 men. He didn't show fear. He didn't show anger. He showed a quiet, weary resignation. I offered you a chance to walk away this afternoon, he said to Miller. You didn't take it. I'm taking the pay, Miller said. Silas offered $500 for your head. That's more than I'll make in 3 years of herding cattle. The nameless cowboy exhaled, a long, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the miles he traveled. He shifted his weight, his boots settling into the hay-strewn dirt. You're facing the wrong way, he said. Miller frowned. What? I never shoot a man who isn't facing me, the cowboy said. But you're already facing me. So that rule doesn't apply. I was talking about your friends in the shadows. They should step out into the light. I want to see their eyes when it happens. The 2 men stepped out. They were nervous. They were holding shotguns. The cowboy knew that at this range, a shotgun was a messy, final thing. He had to be faster. He had to be perfect. The air in the stable became thick, the smell of manure and old hay mixing with the metallic tang of the coming violence. The cow lowed again, a sound that seemed to break the tension like a glass jar hitting a stone floor. Miller moved first. His hand was fast, a blur of motion toward his right holster. The nameless cowboy was faster. He didn't draw and aim. He drew and fired in one continuous, fluid arc. The bone-handled Colt barked once, a deafening roar in the confined space of the stable. The muzzle flash illuminated the darkness for a fraction of a second. The bullet caught Miller square in the chest, the impact throwing him backward into a stack of hay bales. Before the sound of the first shot had finished echoing, the cowboy spun to his left. He fanned the hammer twice. 2 more shots, 2 more flashes. The man with the first shotgun collapsed, the weapon discharging into the dirt as he fell. The second man dropped his gun and held his shoulder, a scream tearing from his throat. The cowboy didn't fire again. He stood in the swirling smoke, his revolver held low, the hammer cocked back for a fourth shot that he hoped he wouldn't have to take. The man on the ground groaned, clutching his shattered shoulder. The cowboy walked over to him, his boots clicking on the hard-packed earth. "Pick up your friend," he said, gesturing to the wounded man. "Get him to the doctor. Tell Silas the price of the ranch just went up." What price?" The man gasped. "His life," the cowboy said. "If I see him, or any of you, near that widow's land again, I won't aim for the shoulder." The cowboy watched as the man dragged his companion out of the stable. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He walked over to Miller's body. He looked at the man for a long moment, then reached down and closed the dead man's eyes. It was a quiet, heavy ritual he had performed too many times. He didn't hate Miller. He didn't even know him. He just knew that Miller had made a choice, and the choice had a cost. He turned back to the cow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of grain he'd taken from a sack near the door. He fed it to her, his hand steady. The next morning, as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, a strange sight greeted the town of Red Rock. The red Hereford cow was tied to the hitching post in front of the bank. Around her neck was a piece of parchment, tied with a bit of hemp rope. Written on the parchment were 3 words, "Property of Alara." Silas was nowhere to be found. Some said he'd taken the midnight stage to the coast. Others said he was hiding in his cellar. It didn't matter. The power he held had vanished the moment the first bullet hit the hay bales. The nameless cowboy was already miles away. He was riding toward the high country, where the air was cooler and the memories were thinner. He didn't have the 50 gold coins. He didn't have the cow. He had nothing but his horse, his colt, and the heavy weight of his code. He pulled his bay to a stop at a small creek. He dismounted and knelt by the water. He washed the black powder residue from his hands, scrubbing until his skin was raw. He looked at his reflection in the clear, running water. He saw a man who was tired. He saw a man who was alone. But he saw a man who had kept his word. He stood up, wiped his hands on his duster, and climbed back into the saddle. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The dust of the valley was behind him, and the trail ahead was long and winding. If you value these stories of honor and the hard-won justice of the old ways, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next ride. Your support keeps the legend of the nameless cowboy alive.